Every year around this time of the year, I make a list of the most favorite books that I've read the year prior. So I want to do this year also. It's usually a 5 book list. There's no particular reason why it's five. I just think it's kind of enough to to have a decent list, but also not too much. Uh, Now, what gets on this list is really my personal impression, the way I feel about the book, the impact it's had on me, and if some of the books that I've read don't make it on the list, it certainly doesn't mean they're not worth it or anything like that. It's just simply that I chose not to put it on the list because it didn't have the kind of impact that I think maybe some other book had on me. So that's kind of this is not very scientific, and it's certainly not a book review or anything like that. So this, at Orange Capital Partners, we're in the business of generating wealth. That's what we do, and reading books is part of the business. So this is very important for us. Like we read books. I always compare it. It's kind of like yoga for the mind. So it's not directly impactful as far as as succeeding as a fund manager, but it certainly helps. The same way yoga helps, but it's not going to make you a better fighter in the UFC or a better football player in the NFL. So here's the list. I'm going to start with 5, 4, 3, and then 2, 1, and go to the best book. So the number 5, Ralph Waldo Emerson, A Mind on Fire, by Robert Richardson, and the tagline is Intellectual Declaration of Independence. So I came across this book. I was inspired actually by Naval to read Emerson. He's a poet that lived sort of in the first part of the 19th century, and he really is the intellectual declaration of independence for the United States. So whatever the United States stands for, or we think still stands for today, I mean, that's a different conversation. And maybe we're losing some of those values, but the values that the United States stood for a long time, and that made the United States what it is, the freedom, the independence, the accountability, the individual, 0 to 1. Peter Thiel's book, in my opinion, is a business book version of Ralph Waldo Emerson's poetry. So this whole concept is epitomized in the person and the poetry of Emerson. Emerson was a poet, so eloquence and the ability to express opinions in a concise and convincing way, that's the weapon of democracy, and that's what the United States still is and certainly has been for a long time. So this is probably the most important uh, idea that I took from this book. I think also on the literary side, the book has done extremely well, in my opinion, because it's shown Emerson's life through his readings. So the author took books that Emerson read and then interpreted it in context with his life. So really important, and just really beautiful how a poet actually had this huge impact on a country and on the intellectual fabric of a country. Number 4, Der Mann ohne Eigenschaften by Robert Musil. The tagline is, we do not have too much science, nor too little soul, but not enough science in matters of the soul. So the Mann ohne Eigenschaften, the man without qualities, is a tome. It's a huge endeavor, and artistically one of the best books I've ever read. I think Musil's artistry with language, the German language in this case, is just out of this world. And if you have to read it as a translation, read it, but if you can read it in German, definitely read it in German. It's just out of this world, the way the man works with language. Now Musil's book is a critique of modernity. So this is the first half of the 20th century, and there's a lot of interesting conflicts and ideas that one thing I've learned in this book, particularly, other than, again, I think the most important thing is just the artistry itself. The way the man works with language, it's just a beauty. but other than that, I think there's a lot of content. There's a lot of interesting things. For example, the collapse of the Austrian Empire is definitely reminiscent of the EU today. It's very similar. Kakanian, as Robert Musil calls the Kalanka monarchy, the Austrian Empire, is very similar. It's this huge bureaucracy, powerful bureaucracy, a lot of intellectual power, a lot of wisdom, a lot of wealth, but under the surface, it's crumbling under its own weight. And it's crumbling because it's not reflecting the organic, natural state of Kakanian. And I think I can see a very strong parallel here to the EU, which in my opinion is just a matter of time until the EU fails, and hopefully it fails in a gentle way, and not like Kakanian, which required World War One to actually dissolve. So but that's a different conversation. So I think I'm fascinated by modernity and sort of the first part of the 20th century. And I think the reason I'm fascinated by this is because I was born right after, right? I was born in 1968. So I'm born in the second half of the 20th century, and I lived my formative years in the second half of the 20th century. So it's like the epoch before I was born certainly influenced me, influenced my parents, influenced my family and the older people around me that I was looking up to, my teachers. So I think that's why I think naturally you're always interested in the epoch just right before you were born. It's this time of extreme conflict between the left and the right, real left and right conflict. The question of free markets, the question of how people should govern themselves. There's totalitarian regimes, World War One, World War Two. So a lot of really quantum physics, revolutions in science. So really a really interesting time, and I think Musil heroically depicts all of these developments in this artistry. Number 3, The Noise of Time by Julian Barnes. The tagline, integrity is like virginity. Once lost, you can't recoup it. This is a book about a Soviet composer and his life in the Soviet Union. I think Barnes, very similar to Musil, is first and foremost an artist. The way he works with language is just unbelievable. But I think as opposed to Musil, I would say Barnes is less of a poet and more of an intellectual power. So his words are not, how should I say, it's not the poetry and the beauty of the sentences that attracts you, it's the content. And I think very important in this book, very similar to, I think last year, my list, one of the books that made on my list was Dr. Zhivago. And I think those books are very similar. Dr. Zhivago is a book about the Russian Civil War, post-revolution, and how the fabric of a society collapses, and how anarchy in the name of a revolution can really be very detrimental. Now, The Noise of Time goes much further. It's the Soviet Union. So now we're past all this turmoil, and we are in the times of Stalin, and it's very scary. It's very scary. When you give up truth, you are giving up everything. And I think this is very, very important for today. We've had this, I think, pivotal moment in our cultural history, which was when Google's Gemini, which is their Gen AI, literally attempted to rewrite history by showing funny pictures of the founding fathers and things like that. I don't want to go into details, but they literally wanted to rewrite history. And there's a tagline of my novel that I published this year, which is Chronopunk. It's available on my website for free. You can read it there, and I think Chronopunk's tagline is actually borrowed from Rage Against the Machine, from the song Rage Against the Machine song Justify, and it's who controls the present controls the future, who controls the past controls the present. That's exactly what I think Julian Barnes is trying to come through in his book. That's what this pivotal moment with Gemini was. When you rewrite history, when you give up the pursuit of truth, you're giving up a lot more than that. You're destroying the fabric of society, because then anything goes, and that's the end of the world, right? Because we can't function like that as humans. Humans have, I think we need to have the goal, the pursuit of truth needs to be our North Star. Otherwise, we can't function as a society. Now, the truth can be different. There can be different interpretations of truth, and we're certainly open for debate about that, and that's important. But what happened in the Soviet Union, this is very beautifully described in this novel, The Noise of Time. Truth was abandoned. That's why the tagline, if integrity, if you give up integrity, because once you give up truth, you become a tactical player. A tactical player is there's no morals, there's no ethics. You just try to navigate this terrible situation where boots could be on your door any night and take you to a gulag. So you don't know what you can say, what you can't say. There's this scene in the book when the composer composes something. This composer, particular composer, I forgot his name. He's actually a real person, but the novel is a novel. It's fiction. But that person's life is depicted in a sort of half historic, half fictional way. And he makes his composition, and Stalin left early, and he thinks that's the end of his life. Actually, and Stalin turns out to tolerate him. He doesn't kill him. But it's just living in a society like that is unbearable. And I think we had a little bit of a taste like that with COVID, and how far our society went in order to become almost like a totalitarian nightmare. We were able to undo that, and thanks God we were, and I think we're on the right path now as a society, back to normal, back to truth seeking, back to meritocracy, away from racism, whether it's reverse racism against white people or whatever racism. It's just horrible. All of these things. It's still not, the woke virus is still around. It's certainly not defeated, but I think our society has turned around. So I think The Noise of Time is a good lesson for anybody who thinks that they're on the moral high ground as a sort of left-wing liberals. Read that novel and think again what you're trying to propagate here. Number 2, so the second best book that I read last year, For Whom the Bell Tolls, by Earnest Hemingway. The tagline, "Life is when you fight and love." So to me, this is, of course, an existential masterpiece. Existential in a sense, what you do is who you are. And you need to fight and you need to love. If there is no fight and if there is no love, then you don't live. So those are the two most important things. Now, what you fight for, how you fight, and who you love and how you love, there is no preconceived thing that you need to fight for and love for. You can fight for a religion, you can fight for a business, you can fight for literally fight in a competitive fight, or it doesn't matter, but you need to fight. And I think this is Robert Jordan chooses to go to Spain to fight in the Civil War, but this is not necessarily about the Civil War per se, the Spanish Civil War, excuse me. It's more about the fight itself. And his family, his grandfather fought in the Civil War, and then the father killed himself. So Robert Jordan chooses to go and fight. And what's really, it's a book about what happens right now is what matters. And there's this mission, the mission to blow up the bridge, and the whole book is about that mission. And I think it's just liberating. I read it last year, actually almost a year ago. It was very shortly after Trump's election. I was very relieved because, like I said, in the discussion of The Noise of Time, I was very, very concerned about where our society was heading. I mean, we were heading into something that was akin to the Soviet Union, and then the Trump election, and back to, like, there is heroism. There's a man fights and loves and has a mission, and all these things started coming back. Now they're much more in our face again. And as much as I'm not happy with Trump's record, and I just one of my episodes, I spoke about this. I think Trump has failed on the financial side of things, but he's definitely won the culture war, and that is to his credit. I think he deserves Mount Rushmore for that. The best book I read last year, number one, Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. Tagline: reaching the trust of love is the ultimate angle of repose. Now, Stegner's Angle of Repose is a masterpiece on every front. It's an artistic masterpiece, a novelistic masterpiece. It's a historic masterpiece. I live in California, so this is my chosen home, and I am enamored by the West of the United States. I think the West of the United States, which basically encompasses everything from the Continental Divide, so all the way from Colorado to California, and up and down everything, New Mexico, up all the way to Idaho and Washington, and everything is just unbelievably fascinating. This is a very, very special place. The West of the United States, not just the West Coast. The West Coast is even more special, but I'm talking about the West now. The geography and the history are just beautiful, and Wallace Stegner is the best historian when it comes to this, telling the story of the West, and he does it as a novelist. And I'm a big believer in, the best historians are novelists. So Wallace Stegner is a beautiful example of that. The artistry here is just unbelievable. The Angle of Repose, which it's a bit of an unlucky name, let's say it that way. It's not the best name for a novel, but that's okay. But the meaning of it is beautiful, because what does it mean? The Angle of Repose is when a sand hill stops moving. So when there's a certain angle, when all the particles of the sand, let's say the sand grains, move against each other in a way that nothing moves anymore. So things stop to move. Like it's the Angle of Repose is when a hill of sand stops to move and is static. And in the book, that happens to a couple where trust is breached. They fall in love, they get married, they have kids, all that, and then there's the trust. Something happens, and then that life, that love just stops. And that's the Angle of Repose, the ultimate Angle of Repose, when love stops. Because when love stops, life stops. And that's just beautifully depicted in the novel. There's a lot of other things that I love about Wallace Stegner. I think as a novelist, again, he's my most favorite novelist, at least American novelist. I mean, he's very close to Hemingway, but I think Stegner is my most favorite American novelist. There's Cormac McCarthy also in the picture. But that's for another episode. I think, again, Angle of Repose, highly, highly recommended. It's a beautiful historic novel about the West and the conquest of the West of the United States, which for anybody who lives here is, I think, beautiful to know that mining that's how it all started, and then it wasn't always Shangri-La. Maybe it still isn't, but definitely wasn't back then. But again, also the artistry of the book is just very beautiful. So those are the 5 books, my top 5 books of last year. Number 1, Angle of Repose. Number 2, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Number 3, The Noise of Time. Number 4, The Mann, ohne Eigenschaften. Number 5, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Thank you.